I recently found Mrs. Beeton's final resting place here in West Norwood Cemetery. Now, if you don't know who she is, she was basically the Victorian Mrs. Hinch. She was famous for Mrs. Beeton's book of household management, which your nan'll have a copy of, and it was full of recipes and housekeeping tips. God, she'd have loved Instagram. She would have tradwifed so hard. Anyway, I always assumed that she was an old lady, but she was only 28 when she died. Her husband, Samuel Orchard Beeton, was a publisher and a magazine editor, and a year after their marriage in 1856 she began writing the cookery column for one of his publications, the English Woman's Domestic Magazine. Sounds like great fun. All of the recipes have been copied from various other sources. See, I told you she'd have loved social media. Sadly, she had several miscarriages and had given birth to 4 children, but only 2 survived infancy, which was an unfortunate reality in Victorian times. She herself died in February 1865 of puerperal fever, also known as childbed fever, and my goodness, it was a heartbreakingly avoidable death that struck literally hundreds of thousands of people. See, germ theory had only been published in 1861 by Louis Pasteur, so people were still getting their heads around how something they couldn't see was causing infections and deaths. Prior to this, they thought infection was spread by miasmas, bad air which you could smell. Hand washing wasn't medical practice, so doctors quite often may conduct an autopsy, eat their lunch, and then go and examine someone giving birth with the same dirty hands, which obviously was not ideal. The outcomes were much better if being attended by a midwife than a doctor, because midwives didn't perform autopsies, and they tended to be more inclined to let birth take its course rather than intervene. This resulted in people giving birth in the streets rather than being seen by a doctor in some places, and you can see why. Hungarian physicist Ignaz Semmelweis had worked out that doctors should wash their hands in 1847 whilst he was working at Vienna General Hospital, and did everything he could to educate doctors about the dangers of poor hand hygiene. He actually modelled cleanliness on the British way, so we weren't the worst for it at least. Semmelweis had a method, he had data to back it up, but the doctors didn't want to wash their hands, which is a fairly compelling argument, I'm sure you'll agree. So hundreds of thousands of people continued to die, and Semmelweis himself ended up being sent to a mental asylum after having a breakdown over the disregard of his work and the resulting death toll. At the time, the cure for madness was to beat the ever-loving daylights out of the patient, which they did, and Semmelweis died 2 weeks after being admitted to the asylum, aged 47, ironically from an infected wound. This wasn't a very uplifting video today, I'm sorry, but remember, wash your hands kids and visit West Norwood Cemetery, it's lovely.